How's everybody doing? For those of you on our committee, thanks for coming tonight. For those of you that haven't been on our committee, welcome. We have spent from May until now going over about 10 different areas of the city's housing, from tax delinquent properties to home ownership to rental properties to vacant land, and several others, code compliance for property maintenance. And at each one of those discussions, we put those out on the webpage, and you can look through those if you haven't, or if you wish to. And the idea was to start understanding what's going on with our housing, number one. Number two, how do we compare to other people around us, both in Butler County and the state? And then what types of best practices and things are being done in other places to change whatever we think needs to be changed. And so we have spent close to 6 months of talking through each of those areas. And so we now have at least a beginning discussion of, when we see a tax delinquent property in Middletown, here's how we should look at it, and here's the 3 or 4 things we should look at and how we should maybe take action on it. And so each one of those, we've kind of laid the groundwork of, when we see this, we're going to do something like this on each piece of those. And so we finished that last month, and then the idea of this month is to start talking about, okay, now we've got all these different tools and things that we've got. Now, how do we start applying them to actual houses? We've talked about conceptually what we do. How do we start taking a neighborhood and saying, all these things we've been talking about, how do we apply them to these 600 houses in this neighborhood right here? From here to here, from here to here. And so one of the things as we've been going through this is we've been talking to Dan and Dan, who I'll introduce here in a minute, and they bought the Carnegie Library on First Avenue and are going to be renovating it back to its beautiful historical self. And we've been talking to them about, okay, now once Vale Middle School is down, how can we redevelop that? And they came to us with a concept of taking the entire Oakland neighborhood, the Baltimore neighborhood, whatever you want to call it, that entire neighborhood, and said, you should let us redevelop that. We've done some cool things in other places. Let us show you what we've done. And what they've done is they've taken a lot of these pieces that we've been talking about, and they've actually gone into Dayton neighborhoods and other places and applied them. Not exactly the way we're talking about, but in other ways that make sense. And so we had them come to council on Tuesday night and kind of give council a briefing of, this is kind of what we're talking about, and this is how it works, and this is how it pays for itself, and this is how we take care of our residents. And I asked them if they would come back tonight in front of the housing people and have the same conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to them here in a minute or two, let them make their presentation, and then they're here tonight to answer questions. So take a look, think about it. And again, if we don't get our questions answered tonight, or if you get home tonight and think of, oh, I wish I'd asked that, if you either get a hold of one of the members of the committee, you can email me. It's doug.a@cityofmiddletown.org. Any way you want to do it. If you want to get the information to us, we will get back with them and we'll get you answers to those questions, and we'll send it out and we'll put it on the webpage so everybody can see it. The idea is, again, to keep everybody on the same page. So Dan, this is Dan Mason, and I'll let him take over.
Appreciate it.
And one of those is right and left, and I don't know which one goes forward and back, but you'll figure it out. Excuse me.
Thank you, Doug.
And we'll let them take over.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening and investing your time. My name is Dan Mason. I'm a historic preservation architect, about 26 years in the industry. And yes, we can do this? Any better? Okay, sorry. Wonderful. Again, my name is Dan Mason. I'm not going to have this for a while, so I'm going to pass it to Dan. Historic preservation architect, been doing this for about 26 years, and as of this last July, I purchased the Carnegie Library. So looking to restore that with a 2020 opening date. It was published back in the journal a little while ago. And because of the location of the Carnegie, the Oakland neighborhood in that same district has near and dear to me, just because seeing that revitalize and turn around really means a lot to the downtown, especially the Carnegie, and re-anchor that whole district. So my colleague Dan Barton, who lives in Dayton, Ohio, lives in the Grafton Hill area, and they've done this model. This model's also been done in Over the Rhine. So there are success stories for that, and the intent for tonight is so Dan can walk through the program, which is Oakland Renaissance Incentive District, or ORID, so just for abbreviation. And this kind of walks through where the neighborhood is, other success stories, and how that model can be rolled out, not just for ORID, but for other neighborhoods and communities around Middletown. So I'll bring on Dan Barton.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Let's see if that will work here. Does this work? Okay, great. Thanks for coming out. I'm Dan Barton. Wanted to explain to you the program that we have developed over a number of years, and also explain that this was a key idea that came to us back in the early mid-2000s as a result of an engagement with a nationwide urban design company called Edward and Kelsey. They were advising the city of Dayton and the city of Cincinnati about urban renewal issues at that point. Cincinnati completely and fully embraced the entire model and deployed it in the over-the-Rhine area. And we'll have some information on that. Dayton used bits and pieces of it, but what we're doing here is a proposal to scale it for a Middletown use. We call it the Oakland Incentive District because it is about creating incentives to rehabilitate and improve a neighborhood. Historic development is often a key to changing a neighborhood that is of a certain age or older. And we look at historic properties as assets, and the redevelopment of those assets being a key to a turnaround on a neighborhood. Old neighborhoods have often experienced declines as the infrastructure ages and disinvestment or obsolete housing stock sets in, and a neighborhood begins to slowly glide down from the time when it was built and in the condition it was when it was new. And most neighborhoods go through some variant of this, but not all of them just continue down in that path. Urban decline particularly is a self-perpetuating phenomenon where lower overall demand leads to declining properties. Declining city services creates more nuisance, more blight, fewer jobs, and increases of crime, which then, and this is critical, it lowers the confidence of the people in the neighborhood. And that lowered neighborhood confidence results in less investment. Every neighborhood needs a continuous reinvestment in it, or it will set into a decline. And as confidence declines, it leads to overall lower demand. Contrary to this, there are now some counter trends that have taken root where unique living spaces can be created. We have smaller households with fewer children than we did in the 50s. We have unique historic neighborhoods which have stabilized or solidified. And then we have cultural and entertainment assets which tend to be more likely to occur close to an urban core like Middletown's. This basically sets up an opportunity where a number of positive forces can be harnessed and utilized to turn around the downward cycle and to create a recovery cycle. Basically, when you create a historic district within a neighborhood, historic districts are considered to be more desirable, and they are perceived to be a better value in investment and a more solid neighborhood. Historic districts have lots of documentation that the property values begin to increase within a historic district substantially after the creation of that district. The improvement of the area image because of the historic district and then streetscape improvements lead to an increasing confidence that brings people back into neighborhoods and causes a reinvestment to occur. This reinvestment can basically be created on a continuing basis so that the process sustains itself over time. And that's the core idea behind this model. I went too far. In Dayton, the Grafton Hill District became a historic district in 1988. And within 6 years, the values had gone from 28,000 to 107,000, just on the basis of that change. Now, I need to explain a little bit about why that happens. In the state of Ohio, the auditor's office looks at properties and evaluates them based on similar valued properties in similar conditions and in similar neighborhoods. Within their rules and regulations, they will not look at a house that is in a historic district and compare it to one that is not in a historic district, or vice versa. So consequently, neighborhoods that are outside of historic districts have a value that's X. Neighborhoods that are within a historic district have a higher value. That opens up several things that are interrelated, one of which is when the property values begin to recover from their low point, banks start to look at trend lines and they look at comparable values. In Grafton Hill, which is the neighborhood I still reside in, our financeability of properties dramatically changed when we became a historic district in '88, because instead of being associated with the neighborhoods around us, which were actually in better condition than we were now compared to the Oregon district. I don't know if you've been to Dayton and know that area. They had very high property values. When we became a historic district, that became our reference point for banks and financing. So suddenly, whereas before '88, you couldn't get money to rehabilitate your kitchen, after '88, you could do your whole house. And consequently, people started doing that. And our values began to rise as people reinvested. Another city of Dayton looked at the consequences of the historic district ordinance in Dayton from '96 to 2012. And again, Grafton Hill had another 88% increase on that. But that wasn't even the highest, because that was our first surge at 280% over the first 6 years. The next cycle that they looked at, which was 14 years, we had another 88% increase. But if you look down through there, you'll see Dayton View, Paul Lawrence Dunbar, and Wright Dunbar had even bigger increases through that period. And it's because of reinvestment and the rising tide lifting the boats in the neighborhood. So the dynamic that is shifted in this criteria underlying the historic district creation is a shift of demand and a shift of perception. And those things drive people's decisions to reinvest or to buy into a neighborhood. And they're very powerful, and it's not just Dayton and Cincinnati, it's basically a nationwide phenomenon. I want to illustrate a little bit of a concept here. At the core of our idea is a financing tool to assist in the redevelopment. And this financing tool, which is called a downtown redevelopment district, is an evolution of some tools that have been around for about 25 years, empowered by the state to encourage reinvestment within urban areas and other areas also, not just urban. But the idea is that if there's an improvement that needs to happen with some kind of an incentive or subsidy, that improvement drives an increase in property values. The increase in property value revenues can go back to fulfill the debt or the obligation encumbered, which is built into the model. So think about it as a fund, a little bit of money that happens over a long period of time that's a result of the improvements that happen. So in this case, what we're advocating for in an urban neighborhood is that we take the Oakland neighborhood and cumulatively put it into this incentive tool and create a revenue stream that will finance the improvements that we're planning to make on a wide range of fronts and issues. But within this model, here's a little illustration of it in the next couple slides. We're starting out with 8 properties. Their cumulative value is $378,000. And then we have empty lots, we have abandoned homes that are boarded up, we have average homes, and then we have a couple of nice houses, which is kind of a typical cross-section of what you see in neighborhoods like Oakland. We also know for a fact, and it's very easily demonstrated, that a house next to a boarded up or abandoned or burned property is worth less than a house in a solid block neighborhood. Nobody wants to be the person who buys the house next to the blight. So blight has a very demonstrable impact upon surrounding properties. And consequently, when you remove blight, property values begin to recover. Now, the other thing that happens within this, if, say, that blighted house in the previous slide gets restored, its value goes up. Our cumulative value of all of these properties rises. But then another significant thing happens as the neighborhood begins to recover and the confidence comes back. New houses will start to come in and infill in the empty lots or the available land within the district, which is within the basket, and can then all of the increment of those new houses funds into the incremental income within the district. So here we have a restored house, the blight has been removed, we've been through a major reappraisal cycle, and we have 2 new houses in this basket of properties here. And from the baseline that we were at 378, we've now gone up to 517. That increment is what replenishes and keeps the fund going and keeps the process moving ahead. And then finally, in kind of another end of the cycle here, the new homes, again, start to appreciate. The other homes that are here are moving upwards with it. It's like the rising tide. And so consequently, a number of years out, the values will be up from 378 to 652. And again, the increment between 378 and 652 is what's going into the fund that's doing things that are causing this to occur. And we'll get into that a little bit later. And to look at it from an overview in terms of the county auditor has regularly scheduled reappraisal cycles for a major reappraisal and a minor reappraisal. And what we want to do is look at the beginning baseline of the DRD financial model, which is to the left of the screen. Now, it's pretty much cooked into the way the auditors work that values tend to rise slightly over time. Oakland has been flat for a very, very long time. We've looked back into the history of the values in Oakland, and they appear to be about a 10 to 15-year flat period, which is a great point for us to start from. Because when things begin to move and things begin to change, everything is going to begin to recover. Oakland's values are very suppressed because of all the factors that we identified earlier. And because of that, being the values low, as they begin to turn around and values begin to recover, the increment that is going to go into our fund that keeps this process moving is going to be greater. With a little bit of priming on the front end, under the category up there of grants, there are a series of things that will begin to happen that we are planning after the historic district, the National Register Historic District is created. And that basically prompts and starts a change. And that at the major reappraisals, as the streetscape improvements have come on, as the incentive programs to buy down interest rates, to help existing homeowners repair and improve their houses, and to help subsidize the construction of new houses within the neighborhood, the incremental improvement in the cumulative value of the properties begins to go up. As that begins to rise, it creates a revenue stream that funds more incentives, more aids to help people stay in their houses and make further improvements so that the conditions of the houses, which would be substandard in many cases now, begin to rise up, and the values of these houses begins to rise. Because people don't want to be an owner in a house where the value is flat or the value is declining. You want to be in a neighborhood where the values are increasing. The values in Oakland will be increasing. They'll be increasing sharply. The knowledge of that will encourage people to move back and fix up houses. We see quite a few empty and abandoned houses in Oakland, and we think those are great opportunities. They are right now blight, but they are tomorrow's opportunities. The components of this, and the reason we think Oakland is a perfect example to utilize this model, is that we start with a low-value area that has had the disinvestment and the lack of renewal over a period of time so that its recovery increment will be greater. And that really well represents what's going on in the Oakland area. Particularly an example of the Carnegie Library, a number of empty lots within solid blocks in the neighborhood, and the Vale Middle School site. We have a very good opportunity to redevelop all of those empty lands to become good, modern, and code-compliant housing, draw people into them, and increase the increment of our program. The blight removal will improve the values of the other surrounding properties and also create more land for redevelopment. The DRD, or the TIF-based incentive, which will improve right-of-way visibility, what we call street furniture, banners, historic lights, and all of those kinds of things, signage, gateways, psychologically tell people this is an improving area, this is a good neighborhood, you want to be here, this is close to downtown and many of the opportunities that are coming out of the concept of urban core living in walkable cities. The historic district creation is always a bump in the improving values. New housing stock will find a market. I don't know if anybody has been up into Dayton. About 15 years ago, they gave up the idea that the entirety of downtown was going to be an office zone. They started reintroducing housing, and Charlie Sims cannot build condos fast enough, and they are bringing what is to us just mind-boggling prices. In some cases, $400,000 and $500,000. We're just all completely dumbfounded by that. The revolving fund, again, is going to build a series of incentives to protect aging in place, to protect home ownership, to protect and incentivize diversity within the neighborhoods, but at the same time encouraging an improvement of the housing stock, improving the streetscape and the security of the neighborhood, and filling the neighborhood back up where there are voids right now. One of the components in this is for Middletown to become a certified local government. That is part of a federal program that's been around for a number of years. You've heard of historic preservation. It got started a number of years ago. It was initially just a series of standards, and cities adopted that as a control mechanism. But a little later, starting in the late 70s, there was an incentive side of that program with the historic tax credits, and that is the core of what I do now in my career. But there's a great opportunity here for the deployment of historic tax credits in the rehabilitation of derelict, blighted houses. I won't get into it because it's too convoluted, but there's a sweet spot for taking several houses at a time and making them a project, and then holding them for 5 years as restored reinvestment properties and then selling them to a homeowner-occupied situation. We're doing that in Dayton right now in the Grafton Hill neighborhood with our blight. But anyway, within the certified local government model, the federal government deputized the states to administer this incentive program, and the states incentivize and can deputize cities to deploy eligibility for the tax credits. And one of the things that we're looking at in the Oakland neighborhood, and particularly for the Carnegie, is that Middletown becomes a certified local government, so Middletown itself can qualify buildings for the historic tax credits. We won't have to go to Columbus to make our case that Oakland is an important thing for Middletown, or that the Carnegie Library in Middletown warrants tax credits as opposed to some other town. Those are important tools within this overall program. This is the Oakland neighborhood as it's classically defined, And we are looking at this entire area and some adjacent parcels that, that make it consistent with the way the state looks at historic districts. So there's a little bit of expansion anticipated in a few areas from here. It really comes down to capturing both sides of a street. A lot of times planning departments like to draw a boundary right down the middle of a street, and this side of the street is one neighborhood and that side of the street is a different neighborhood. The historic preservation people say this street is a historic street and it should capture both sides. So that's just one minor little thing there. We think that this is an integrated strategy, and because it has a financial basis under it, and it's a very documented and a very proven kind of thing, there's very, very little risk involved here because these things will just kind of happen. We're going to actually turbocharge them and basically get it moving. Within the district, the use of the funds are going to be to encourage the acquisition of land for new housing development, encourage the acquisition of new commercial development. We are going to use the fund to remove blight and buy down interest on a whole range of things, which could include maintenance, deferred maintenance, improvements to the neighborhood, and actual acquisition and aging in place and home ownership. And then streetscape improvements, because every great neighborhood needs to have a sense of pride of place, and that needs to be established within the Oakland neighborhood. In kind of a top-level view, what we're anticipating for a 20-year sequence, again, this is not something that happens overnight. This is something that happens over a series of years. Basically, our starting baseline will probably be around $19 million. We expect, with blight removal and the first several reappraisals, a big bump in values. We don't know the extent. We are going to make assumptions and projections on new development coming in, but we are looking at a downstream redevelopment total of around $78 million from the $19 million base. That will give the DRD income $10 million to buy and make these improvements. And also because of new people moving in and abandoned houses being occupied, it will return money to the city in terms of income tax and all kinds of other taxes and spin-off sales tax, that kind of stuff that happens. So we think the model, and we're looking and going to be revising this based on our final survey area. We are still trying to get a handle on exactly how much land we'll have for new housing, how many blighted parcels we'll be able to get control of. And we don't need control of all of them. It can happen over time. But it's a revenue stream that's coming in. It's going to incentivize many, many times the dollars that we're seeing here in terms of the income coming in by incentivizing and buying down interest rates. Then basically we should make a massive turnaround within the Oakland. Oops. One of the things I wanted to think, I wasn't sure if the slide was in here or not. This is the model that Over the Rhine has been using since the early aughts. And if any of you have been down to Over the Rhine in the last 10 years especially, they have set up, their project was a massive neighborhood, just in, I think it's like 500 acres now. And they got a lot of money from corporate sponsors to do that front loading of the grants, et cetera. But then they've been buying down. They've underlaid this with a historic district. They keep expanding the historic district. They keep expanding the areas and the buy downs of their incentives, and it's just completely turned the neighborhood around. And if we look back to, I went to school in Cincinnati in the mid-70s, and Over the Rhine was a mostly empty neighborhood. In terms of the population by the mid-70s, the population was just a fraction of what it had been in the 40s and the 50s. And what we have now is a situation where buildings that have actually just completely fallen in and there's nothing left but the facade are being rebuilt and being brought back and recreated. There's a lot of street life now, a lot of small restaurants and charming little shops and that kind of thing. And the population is beginning to rise dramatically as units come back into production. You can't occupy a building that's, you know, in a complete state of collapse. And I'm working on 3 of them right now on Clifton and Pete. And they had been bumping down and down into condition. Nobody had been doing any repairs on them. And they finally hit rock bottom. An investor, a Cincinnati investor, has got them and has turned them around using these incentives, using the development fund down there, using historic tax credits, state and federal. It's gotten basically $1.3 million in free money coming into a project that otherwise would be hard to justify. So that economic tool, the historic tax credits, new market tax credits, are critical to turning a neighborhood around. And now Over the Rhine was in worse condition by far than Oakland, but Oakland neighborhood really is very close to the South Park neighborhood in Dayton in terms of condition, type of houses, et cetera. And South Park has had just a tremendous turnaround in the last 15, 20 years. So I think that's entirely something that can happen here in Oakland. That's all I've got. I'd like you to ask questions of Dan and I, and any comments?
Give me 2 minutes and
Sure.
I'll turn it back over to you. You've heard what they've said, and I want you to ask questions, but I wanted to add on to what they're doing because they will be working on the housing in that area. Council's got us working on getting as much paving money together as we can, so part of that renovation of this neighborhood will be repaving all the streets, fixing all the sidewalks, fixing all the alleys, looking at street lighting. We've been talking with the committee about things like some of our streets don't have adequate street lighting for safety. Let's fix that. While we're fixing the neighborhood, let's fix it all. Let's get all of it done. So all of these things, Oakland Park was a mess a few years ago. Everybody came in and cleaned it up. Looked great now. But how about a $100,000 renovation of that park as part of this? I mean, seriously, let's redo it all. The alleyways, I was in Kansas City a few years ago, and they were doing some really cool things with alleyways where not only did they light them so they were safer, but they were turning, especially on some of this housing where it's close to the street, the alleys were becoming where the community got together for football games and things like that. That was a gathering place, and they had changed the nature of those alleys around to make them much more enjoyable as part of the living experience instead of something you just drive down with trash and crap everywhere. They cleaned it all up and they did something nice with it. We've talked about area businesses. We've talked about access to healthcare. We've talked about access to Wi-Fi. We've talked about food deserts and access to fresh food. And the idea is, while they're doing the housing piece, hopefully the city is coming in and working on not only the infrastructure piece, the sidewalks, the streets, the lighting, those types of things, but the non-infrastructure things. How can we look at smart city concepts? How can we look at gateways into the neighborhood? All those types of things that are going to truly lift that neighborhood up beyond just the housing, but all of it up in a really meaningful way. And so theoretically, we've got $650,000 every year in CDBG funds. We have $350,000 a year in home funds. That's without touching the general fund. They've already got us working towards paving a lot of it. So again, if we know we have so many lane miles to pave and it's going to take 4 years to renovate the neighborhood, 5 years, whatever the plan comes together at, I can lay that into the paving schedule so that as we're going down Baltimore Street this year, we make sure that the sidewalks get fixed and the streetlights get fixed and the streets get paved, and continue to work with wherever they are in the neighborhood so that as we're moving along, everything gets done at the same time. Now, let's say you get this neighborhood done and everything's going great and it's working fantastic and everybody's loving it. People are moving back in, everything's going great. Go pick another neighborhood and let's fire it up again. And the idea is, theoretically, you've got 6, 7 neighborhoods that are in distress. What if 15 years from now, all of them are fixed? That's kind of the concept that we're trying to get to for everybody. We want all ships to rise. So I'm going to sit back down, especially on the DRD part. We're here. Please ask questions.
There's one thing I should have mentioned. We're in a phase right now where we're really evaluating the size, scope, and the procedures. The next thing that we would move forward to is the beginning of the implementation. And within that concept there's another thing that happened in the city of Dayton that I wanted to mention here, which was really critical to the turnaround. And it's about ownership and investment in the people who are in the neighborhood. A lot of these programs are going to be administered and advised by a community association. We anticipate working with the Oakland community to set up what in Dayton is a very common thing. We used to have this thing called the priority boards. The city is divided into like 35 different neighborhoods. Each has their own neighborhood council. They each operate against a set of rules and they have responsibilities. And they take and play a role in the administration of these policies and incentives. So this is not just something coming from above and below. There's actually going to be a lot that we're going to ask of the Oakland neighborhood, the residents who are there, the people who are there who are the natural leaders, the people who want to have a voice in what happens so that you can make decisions about the kind of improvements that you want to see, what are the critical importance of the security issues that need to be addressed, and the nature of the programs and how they're looked at. This is not just a cookie cutter that comes down, it's going to be an evolving process. And we're going to need broad involvement of the community. And that will start as soon as the last of our analysis and financial and physical district planning gets in place. Any questions?
What's the acreage in the designated area?
I think it's probably about 12 acres.
That big area that you?
I'm winging it here. I really don't know the acreage.
Second question is, how do you handle dislocation?
We're not anticipating dislocation. The issue that we're going to go after is we're going after abandoned houses, houses that cannot be occupied. There is no plan for any acquisition of any occupied houses. We're going after the worst, and we're going to turn them around and make them the best. And then we're going to put the tools out there so that the people who are hanging on, who've gone through this long decline and see the process start to go the other way, we're going to give them the tools so that they can stay in place and continue to participate in the neighborhood. But we don't anticipate buying any occupied houses.
That's one thing that I'm passionate about as an architect. Sorry. That's just one thing I'm really passionate about as an architect, that you have so many residents that have been there, some of them their whole lives. As we were going around surveying and just stopping and just checking out the condition of the homes, probably about, 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Driving at 2 mile an hour pace and stopping. We were there for two days. And we had some amazing residents come out and say, "What are you doing?" Truly concerned. It was wonderful. Great. Those are the people you want to stay. I mean, that's why these low interest loans, if they want to fix something up with their home, great. That's what this is for. It's owner occupied. And that's the intent. So like Dan said, the abandoned homes, empty lots, those are the things really targeting of, let's improve those. Homes that have been there boarded up. It's a major opportunity. And if someone's son, daughter, grandparent, whatever, wants to move into that neighborhood, there's a great opportunity to buy that abandoned home, get a low interest loan, and fix it up themselves or get contractors to do it. But build on that community that's there. It's an amazing place. Yes, ma'am.
One of our issues is that we have a high percentage of rental properties.
Yeah.
And the disconnect between the rental property and the tenant in some instances, nothing I've heard so far addresses that.
Well, the issues that we're going to be facing are going to be long-term issues. One of the things, we can't directly impact some aspects that are social-based, but we do know that there are land owners or folks who buy and then rents without maintaining properties well and create a negative environment, et cetera. What has to happen and will happen is those people who are using the neighborhood are going to cash out. And as they begin to cash out, because there will be a rising expectation of a standard of maintenance. And some of these people are not willing to reinvest in the neighborhood buildings that they're renting out. When they see the values begin to start ticking up, they will start cashing out. And they'll take their economic model to a different place. So that will begin to change the neighborhood, but it will not be super fast. It'll happen over time. And for those people, those landowners who have taken advantage of this and have been neglectful in their maintenance, they will begin to become a smaller part of the neighborhood in the future.
Part of becoming a historic district requires us to do a little more with code enforcement to keep those properties up. The second piece of that is there are some incentive programs that we've seen around the country where we can help landlords cash out. Not only is the value going up and they can cash out, but we might give them an incentive to cash out, and even a bigger incentive if they cash out to a homeowner
Right.
instead of another landlord.
Yeah.
And so there are some things we can do. He's right, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort. This whole thing is going to take time and effort to get done. But the idea is if we can start putting positive tools in place, as things go more and more over time, we will start to weed those people out. It'll just take time.
And really quick to add on to that, with that community group and those action groups of those that live there, they're playing a key role in that.
Yeah.
They're driving that.
Right.
They're the hands on the pulse. We have, I don't know, I'm just saying, out of the 300 homes, we have 150 renters in this neighborhood. What are we doing about them? That voice is supposed to be heard. Those are the people we need standing up, those residents, to make sure that that's happening and the city's coming through with those incentives and all that. And what are you really doing?
What is the timeline, estimated timeline for the CLG designation? You know that?
I don't have a great solid answer on that. The city is about 80% there in terms of what is needed at the state level to become a certified local government. And basically there'll be just some more decisions have to be made on timing of the resources that are going to be necessary for that. There's really not much of an obstacle other than a decision on resources for inspectors and training inspectors. Most of the infrastructure is already there. There is already a historic commission impaneled and ready to basically pick up the role that the state envisions.
In the case of over the Rhine in Cincinnati, one of the big advantages of that is that you had the PDGs and the GEs and the Krogers. I mean, you had very viable Fortune 500 businesses.
Yeah.
So that executives were very anxious to come downtown because in most cases they could really walk to work.
Right.
You know, and a lot of people that lived over the Rhine continue to be displaced there. And so there's a negative sentiment that goes along with what's happening over the Rhine relative to gentrification.
Right.
So I'm saying I know something about that, and I also know something about the renovation, the redevelopment of the West End City West. That happened. Saying I was involved in that, and the
Okay.
same thing happened.
Okay.
And where you have gentrification, you know, caused by displacement of people who are either there or proximal to there.
Right.
And so I'm saying, well, will that happen here?
Over the Rhine is physically a pretty unique space where you have these very large, they were tenements when they were originally built in the 1880s. Most of them were single room occupancy apartments. Each apartment had its own fireplace and families lived in one room. The change that happened in the 40s through the 70s took those buildings and turned them into apartments that were usually Section 8 or in some kind of a subsidized environment. What happened over time is the owners of those properties didn't reinvest in them, and the roofs started leaking, the electrics were bad, No one cleaned up all the lead paint and all of that kind of stuff. And then the buildings began to get in further poorer condition, and the owners just basically started walking away from them. And within that context, there were people who are living, sometimes squatting in buildings. And without a question, when a building has been abandoned and there are people in that situation, and someone comes in and buys it, they are being evicted, and that does count as a gentrification. I don't see that scenario in Oakland the same way. I see a lot of single-family houses. I see some doubles. I just don't see any scenario where we're going to come in any fashion and try to buy up a lot of parcels and displace people. Like I said before, we're looking for the worst properties, the buildings that have been burned, the buildings that are sitting boarded and empty. Those are what we want to get control of, because those are the ones that drive our incremental income into the TIF or to the DRD. That incremental income buys us more incentives. When we take that empty building and we fix it up and get it occupied again, or conversely, take it and what we call package it so that it's a viable, attractive parcel for a low bit of money for someone to come in and be a homeowner occupied and use their sweat equity. When we begin to turn that around, that's where the movement happens. We're not going to buy a building and throw people on the street to renovate it. There is no market for that, and there is no increment in that for us. Our increment is building on empty land and taking empty buildings that nobody's paying taxes on and put them back on the tax roll. So I hear what you're saying, and I understand exactly, and I know that is happening. But there's also programs, the low and moderate income housing tax credit, which we will probably look at in some context for, again, probably what will be single standalone buildings. We're not looking at big scale multi-family buildings.
So what kind of buildings are you looking for? Because I know there has been a lot of discrepancy on with how all of this is kind of started and everything. So what's the actual, would it be $100,000 place, or, I mean?
We're still working on that model. They are more likely to be singles or doubles. They're more likely to be townhouses. They're more likely to be homeowner occupied than not. But they're not going to be out of scale to the neighborhood. We're not going to come in with some big thing. There's going to be, and that's part of the rationale that is embedded within the National Register Historic District. The things that come in have to be in scale and scope with the existing fabric of the neighborhood. And repairing that is the plan, because there's plenty of land to do that, and there's plenty of opportunity in empty land to do that is consistent with the historic character of the neighborhood. We want this neighborhood to be it looks like it begins to heal. That the scale of the new stuff that goes in is the same as the stuff that's there. And we want you to be able to drive down the street instead of seeing 5 or 6 empty lots where houses used to be. You just drive down the street and you don't even notice that there is something that's new there in a neighborhood that was mostly built around 1900. And you can do that in the Oregon district. If you go down some of those streets, there's 20 or 30 new houses that you have to actually go up and look at the foundation to see that they're old. These things can come back together. Neighborhoods can be basically healed. And that's the intention here.
I think also, to answer your question, to add to that, is with the 3, 4, 5 different models coming up with, or options for the design, that's partially what we'd be proposing for the infill, is that the cost of those would be current market now, but the intention is that when that neighborhood goes up in value, those increase with that. Definitely. And then, you're in there 4 or 5 years, you're going to see that huge bump, because it's literally going to be comparing it to the neighbor property. And if you infilled another empty lot, again, like Dan had mentioned, that impacts your property value and So it's whatever that market is at that time, the cost of it. Given with the lower incentives for the interest rates, and that's all part of that initial money coming in, that'll buy those lower. So whatever the market rate is now, the interest rate, the intent is that the interest rate would be lower because the city can buy that down with the banks. So it'd even be a better deal than you'd be getting at the typical bank.
So will it just be townhouses, or will it be houses?
The, the intent where we were probably about 3 months ago when we were starting this process is, from what we're hearing, there's a huge need in the city now for 3 and 4 bedroom homes. So we're trying to bridge that gap because there's a lot of there's a lot of 2 and sometimes 3 bedroom homes in those older homes, since some of them were, broken up smaller then, but that is the intent for a 3 and 4 bedroom with staying within the scale. So you can go back a little farther on the lot, the way it still matches the adjacent properties. That's what we're hearing, and that's for the infill. That's not the Vail site. So I think that's still under discussion of what that really builds up to be. Still housing, but what's that really look like? I think it would still follow that same model of the historic district for character, and not necessarily something just landed and plopped in that you could bring in from LA or something, but I think that's the intent right now. And again, neighborhood community group.
And if I could encourage you, if you get some time the next couple of weeks, drive up to Dayton, drive around the historic districts, and look at the new stuff that's up there. One of the things that we're going to be asking for is feedback on some concepts and some designs. We know some information from market studies, but we're going to have designs that are going to be they're going to be compatible in size and scope, but they're not exactly going to be all houses just like the houses that are there too. There's going to be some variety. And in some of the instances with the Vail site, we have the opportunity to do more contemporary kinds of designs. And there's a very popular pattern that's coming up where there's a patio on the roof. And Charlie Sims can't build enough of those. They still look like historic row houses, but you look up and they've got a patio on the roof and people love them.
You had your hand up, sir. I don't want to discredit you.
It was just a question. Twice now, questions about gentrification have been brought up, and we have talked about possibly the worst case scenario in gentrification, where you go in up front and you take people out of their current living situations. Understanding that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
At the end of the uptick of the trend of potential income, the trend of potential reinvestment,
Yeah.
the people that currently live there potentially won't be able to stay. So when they were asked about displacement, it wasn't so much
Yeah.
upfront question as
Right. Aging in place.
people that live there right now,
Yeah.
the interest low on the loan,
Right.
they can't even get a loan today for anything.
Right.
What will happen to those people who can't afford to stay in that neighborhood?
Well, we're all on a path that has an end. There will be a point for all of us where we will probably have to be in a different place than we are now. But our objective is to create programs that allow people, as long as they're able to be able to remain in their house. And that is one of the objectives of some of these incentives. We do not want to displace people. We want to make it possible for them to live in their homes and maintain their homes as long as they are physically capable. And then once that point is reached, we want to create within the neighborhood. We have in Grafton Hill a couple of senior housing units where we've taken some of our big old apartments and we've turned them into senior housing. And there's a point where you can't maintain your yard anymore, and you don't have any desire to deal with all of those issues. And then we want to be able to create or have nearby a particular type of low maintenance living place for folks who are seniors and don't want to have to, do the maintenance thing anymore.
I think I'm hearing your question differently. I think I'm hearing your question as like the values go up, therefore the costs go up. Correct. Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think that's what I heard you were talking. That's where I heard you coming from. So again, I'm not sure with the programs that the city's looking at for the incentives, but within development in the larger areas, I know for the larger corporations coming in with these big buildings and them getting freeze on taxes for a certain duration, 10, 15, 20 years, I don't know if that's an incentive that the city's researching right now. So you have someone that's been in their home, they're between, I'm just making up an age, they're between 60 and 80, and they are on a fixed income, even 50, it doesn't matter. My point is that if there's an incentive with the city that their property taxes can be frozen where they are at that date, that the neighborhood can continue to increase, and those homes being built around them at a higher value, those homes will be subject to those higher property taxes. So where someone is living in their home and it's currently worth $15,000 or $20,000, those taxes could be frozen at that rate for X amount of years, 15, 25, I don't know what that is. That's potentially something that could address that. Therefore, they're not having to make up those extra funds.
And we are looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm part of the committee.
But I will tell you, at some point, you know, whether it's 10, 15, 20, at some point, if you're fixing the neighborhood, you're fixing the neighborhood, and everything's going up, and I can protect everybody for some period of time, at some point, yes, it's going to roll off.
The-
Whether it's 10, 15, 25 years, at some point that would roll off. And, you know, this is one of those, if you're gonna renovate the neighborhood, you gotta renovate the neighborhood.
The other thing that we would,
Millions of dollars in paving, it's millions of dollars in sidewalks, it's millions of dollars in streetlights, it's new housing.
the other thing that we have to think about here, particularly for the long-term homeowners, when they get to the point where they can't maintain the house anymore, they need to have a different place to move to. It's better to have them sell a house that's worth $100,000 than to sell a house that's worth $20,000. The equity that is being built into the houses in the neighborhood will be redeemed by the people who own the houses.
I like what I'm hearing, and I think it's fairly ambitious. I think it certainly speaks to a need that Middletown has. But I think that seems like an important part of what you have in mind is to hit the right level of affordability. And what I think may happen is that there's going to be another level below affordability. And that's going to be subsidized. And that's where you're going to get some tension.
Okay.
Because if a family can afford a mortgage, then that's not going to be a problem. But if there are people who need housing but don't make the cut in terms of affordability, then some kind of public assistance is usually the first thing that's thought of. Now, when that happens, then you get into mixed income housing.
Yeah.
And that has a whole bunch of challenges,
Yeah.
associated with that.
Right.
And the reason I'm saying that because, I have some familiarity with what the economic status of Middletown is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, affordability and assisted living is going to hit the table early.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of what it costs to build a decent house.
Yeah, it will.
Yes.
It will, without a doubt. In Grafton and in some of the Cincinnati areas, the big unused churches, schools, and other public buildings have often been converted to answer and go directly to that market. In Dayton, we had a big commercial building at the corner of Salem and Grand Avenue. We converted with the tax credits. We're looking at Longfellow School right now. And in Cincinnati, I know that they take most of their schools and turn them into a mixed income, often senior-oriented housing, because that's where a lot of that need is. And we'll be looking at opportunities. There are a number of schools we kind of discovered in our survey, and if at any point those schools come up, that will be targeted for those kinds of developments. Because again, with a school, it's sitting in the tax rolls at zero. If we turn it into a private use with an LLC, it's paying taxes and the increment goes into the fund.
Good question.
Can I ask a question? Because, and I think a lot of this has to do with, in the city of Middletown, from what I understand, and just overall, where I've only been here about almost 11 years, but overall, that there's a level of distrust. And I think that some level of written documentation or that type of thing, because the biggest issue is people feel that they're going to be displaced, will be very beneficial
Right.
and everything. And I just think that that would be something that would be definitely
Yeah.
advantageous for the city.
Ca-
So is that something? that
Yeah,
you-
absolutely. Coming out of this process, there will be a lot of published documents. And when we say that we want to seed within the Oakland neighborhood a community council, we're going to be asking that council to weigh in on these issues. And this is not something that's like, boom, it's done and it's fixed and it'll never change. It's going to evolve over time. We're going to make some assumptions on what will work right off the bat. But then every 3 years or less, we're going to be looking at it again saying, we didn't have many takers on this program. We had more people over here. So let's do this. Or we've identified this other need that we hadn't really thought about. And we need to do something for senior housing. Or we need to do something for single parents. You know, all of those things, we don't know exactly the market mix as this neighborhood begins to recover and evolve. But we're going to have a process that lets us look at that and every couple years adjust the programs so that we meet the needs of what the neighborhood is going to be needing in the next 2 to 3 years after this. Like I said, this is a 20-year cycle. We're going to start out, we're going to attack the worst of the worst because, you know, everybody wants something to be done with that burned out house. And the easiest thing for the city to do is to send in a bulldozer. And then we got a vacant lot that nobody's mowing, or the city mows it twice a year or whatever it is. Those vacant lots are not good. You know, we have to basically solidify the neighborhood, get the housing stock improved, get maintenance going on, and get the values moving up so that people will want to move in. And as the values move up, the homeowners will have the benefit of that over time.
Another benefit of that really quick is that when the process continues to move forward and the neighborhoods request like voice, we need that location, place that people, neighbors can come to, open the door, explain that, what their needs are, what's not being met, in addition to the neighborhood, like local government group that's speaking up. I mean, we need to hear those things. So this program can work for everyone's needs in starting in Oakland and then whatever that next neighborhood would be. Yes, ma'am.
We don't have a priority board system that's similar to the one that you have in Dayton that has been in existence for a really long time.
Yeah.
So when we talk about creating some local policy governance, is that going to come on your side of the table or going to come through the city side of the table? Or how's that going to?
I have access to all the information and all the programs and policies that were the priority board. We're going to bring them down here and see if it'll work here, the way it worked in Dayton.
So
Because in Dayton,
you're going to create a similar institution?
we want, the priority board system was designed to create a concept that was kind of a hot thing in the 70s, where people think of where they live, not by the city, but by their neighborhood. And then the decision was to empower certain functions down to the lowest level of a neighborhood and to encourage those people to invest their time and energies in the policies and the kind of enforcement issues they want to see in their neighborhood. And at this point in Dayton, if you ask somebody from Dayton, where do you live? They say, well, I live in Grafton Hill in the city of Dayton because it really works. Your association to your neighborhood will become your primary sense of identity of where you live. And it absolutely, it's probably as good as any of these mechanical things are that we're going to do in the auditor's processes, et cetera. It's planting that seed that will make the Oakland program work, because you're going to come up with things that you guys want to do that are all about your neighborhood. In Grafton Hill, we have this crazy thing. It's called the pumpkin glow. This last Halloween, we carved 1,000 pumpkins, put them on the hill, and basically let everybody in the county come and look at them. It's a crazy idea, but it's a huge community building thing. We're going to have a home tour in December, and I hope many of you will be able to come. And these are the things that just start to grow organically as a result of this process. But it also comes with empowerment. And empowerment to say, this is what we need. These are the programs that we need. This is how these incentives need to be utilized. And this is what we want in enforcement, and this is what we want in public safety. And have an ongoing role in that. Have monthly meetings, have periodic carry-in dinners, get to know your neighborhood, get to know your neighbors. You know, once that part of this equation takes root, it has payoffs that you can't hardly even imagine. They're almost impossible to quantify, because it's not like it is with you can quantify a new building going up, but you can't quantify the fact that you have a group within your neighborhood that makes sure that if somebody is ill, they've got food coming in, you know, those kinds of things. That knitting of a neighborhood back together by giving them a role, by giving them functions and decisions to make, heals the neighborhood.
Just curious, you're going from a neighborhood where you can get a home for 20,000.
Right.
How do you transition from that to what, 160, 80,000? And who
Some,
are they? Can they really afford that?
somebody takes a leap of faith. You know, it happens. We have condominiums selling on Monument Avenue in Dayton for over $400,000, and there hasn't been a house sold within a mile of that over $200,000 in a couple of years. But all of them have been built, and all of them have sold. Our neighborhood has had tremendous recovery. In '88, our average value in Grafton Hill was $46,000. Now it's almost on the brink of $300,000. So the $20,000 and the $40,000 houses, somebody's going to look at those when they come on the market, and they're going to see opportunity, and they will take it. They'll buy it, and they'll do a whole house rehab, and everyone will stand back and be amazed, and it'll happen again and again and again, and eventually, the whole character of the neighborhood, I'd say 10 years out, is going to be so changed that you'll be hard-pressed to remember, you know, the low point.
There were so many homes as we were driving through Oakland that I was astonished just by the amount of aluminum siding and vinyl siding hiding the original details, the corbels, the box gutters, the cornices. They're there. And when you bring someone knowing what's happening to that neighborhood and what the vision is and the community involvement, sign me up.
Yeah.
I would buy one in a heartbeat.
One of the things in Grafton Hill, we have houses of 5,000 square feet, or 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, a couple of them even bigger than that. That's an obstacle. In South Park in Dayton, where the housing stock is almost exactly the same size and age, those neighborhoods have had the biggest turnaround and biggest improvement, because those are easier houses to manage for a young couple, a family with 2 or 3 kids. You know, the big monster houses are tough. So I think there'll be a pretty quick and smooth increase in improvements happen through Oakland.
You had a question?
My question is kind of similar to Dan's, but my question was, so it sounds like your initial step is to get a home that's abandoned, fix it up, get a homeowner in that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question was, who do you envision as your homeowner in the initial step? And it sounds like, my question was more of, is it someone who's looking for a mortgage payment that's close to their rent? Or is it someone who's looking to step up? Is it a step-up house? Is it someone who, because we've seen it, I'm a realtor, we've seen people who are willing to go into a less desirable area if the home is nicer than a home they could buy in another area.
Right.
So that was more of my question of just who is the home buyer initially?
For the houses that are packaged and still needing work, I'm going to say it's going to be somebody young. There are some older folks who would take that on, but mostly it's going to be younger folks, probably pre-kid, looking, maybe they don't have huge resources, but they've got energy and smarts, and they want to turn that into equity. We'll be looking for people who understand that they are building equity, because those are the folks who are going to succeed.
So then the first buyer is somebody who's going to actually do the work?
Often it will be that case. In our neighborhood, we had identifiable types of people come in. You know, there were the pioneers. We're going to be at the pioneer stage for a while.
So it's more of an owner, and then you guys will help them?
Yeah, the pioneers will come in, and they will take the worst of the worst, and they'll turn them around, and they'll be wonderful in a showcase. Then they'll sell it, and they'll move on. Sometimes those same people will do it over and over again in a neighborhood. We have this one family who's done like 8 houses in our neighborhood. They're just nuts.
So it sounds like there's more steps to it then.
Yeah, the second wave of people who come in are the folks who are, maybe they have a little more resources and not so much energy to devote to a project of fixing up a house, because it's a big multi-skilled kind of thing. And they come in and they buy at the market rate. And then there's a wave that happens after that that's, again, another kind of a mindset of the people who want to live in a nice neighborhood. Because when we're starting, those people wouldn't consider it. But after they see the whole neighborhood beginning to change, they'll consider it. And that's when you're you're up and you're out of the trough that Oakland has been in for a while. Sure.
Being an architect,
Yes, sir.
I've got background in it as well. You're talking your infill, and you just mentioned cornices and things like that, decorative increments of the house.
Yes, sir.
Are you gonna, I mean, is this gonna be, the community is gonna dictate the designs of these infill houses? We're not gonna just throw a Ryan home in there with vinyl siding on 3 sides and that type of thing.
Nope.
We're gonna put something that's gonna be,
Sorry.
you know,
That's the purpose of the historic district.
Correct.
Because the standards of the National Park Service for compatibility will regulate that. There will be no Ryan house dropped into an 1900
I didn't have a poker
neighborhood.
face on that one, sorry. Yeah, the intent would be that there, like I said, there's a lot of details already in Oakland. They're there. They're hidden. Some of them are in plain sight. There's so many stained glass windows in that neighborhood. It's amazing. So just reusing and duplicating those elements that are already there, that's the intent. Enhancing.
Is it a little cost prohibitive in today's market to try to bring things of that magnitude into
No.
your house?
Oh my
No.
gosh, no.
No.
I mean, you don't have to do every corbel in the wood. There are synthetics that are made that are so plentiful now, and 2.5 stories up, supporting a gable of a roof, you have one in the middle, 2 on the sides. I mean, it is what it is. Paint it whatever color the homeowner wants, and it's done.
30 years ago, that was absolutely the truth, but the amount of support on historically appropriate detail and its inexpensiveness is just unbelievable now.
I've got a question concerning demand.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Over the Rhine, and I'm familiar with downtown Dayton and also Grafton,
Yeah.
both of which are county seats, county government, federal government buildings, etc.
Yep.
Downtown Middletown has a much more limited number of people working,
Yeah.
and et cetera. So where is some of the buyers coming from?
They're 20-somethings right now. I don't know if you have noticed, but there's been a big shift in what the 20-somethings are looking for. You know, 25 years ago, they were looking for a house out in the cornfields, you know, and they're just not that interested in that anymore. They grew up in those houses. Nobody wants to buy mom and dad's house. They want something new. There's a whole new trend that's about urban, that's about walkability, that's about walking down to the little brew pub, that's about walking down to your local favorite little shops and having a community gathering dinner, et cetera. And that shift away from a completely car-based suburban attitude is going to make Middletown a hot place to be in this immediate geographic area. It's going to be different from Westchester. And there are going to be kids from Westchester coming down to Middletown to buy an old house, fix it up, and to do this whole thing.
The Walker,
We talked about our housing study a few times from Danter. Danter says that there's at least demand for 1,000 new downtown housing units over the next 10 years. And they've got 10 pages of statistics as to how they came up with that. So we believe in that.
A question regarding your territory, your limits.
Yeah,
Central Avenue, right, okay, 2 blocks over from where your First Avenue is, if you will.
yeah,
Okay. There are a lot of buildings there that, back in the day, apartments upstairs,
Yep.
mom and pop shop downstairs.
right.
If you could incorporate this program in Central Avenue, both sides of the street, now you're gonna have investors that can be willing to do that.
Yep.
If you stay a block away, those investors are still not gonna invest the money to turn those into condos or something like that up above. How
Right.
do you rectify that?
We extend this model into those areas.
Is there limitations right now on where the limits can be?
Well, it's kind of a policy decision. We're going to test this. We're going to see that it works, and then we'll take it from there.
Keep in mind, you have $4.5 million worth of improvements coming in 2022 through OKI, completely reduce Central Avenue. So it gives us 4 years to lay that out so that we're ready and doing it responsibly.
Yeah.
History behind us.
One of the other, we have found a way to make the historic tax credits very accessible to small and mid-sized buildings. That, 10 years ago, somebody would have asked you and they would have said, oh, if you don't have a project that's $7 million, you can't do tax credits. Well, we can do tax credits economically and profitable down to $250,000. So, you've got a 6,000 square foot commercial with 2 floors of retail or residence above that. You can do that. If Middletown becomes a CLG, they can put the landmark, national landmark status under that project, and then it can get the tax credits, just the way we're going to do that with the Carnegie Library, which is, it's not a huge building, but those tax credits are the difference between viable and not viable.
What are your intentions for the Carnegie building? What is it gonna turn into?
the Carnegie Library is 17,000 square feet, and the main library, the first floor of the main library, will turn into a restaurant. It's a restaurateur coming in. He has 2 other locations. He's kind of holding off with his name announcing. The back part of the library on that first floor, which is a 2-story space actually inside there where the stacks were, that'll be the brewery loft. So in the basement will be a tap room. So it'll be a home brewer's brewery, which means that there will be beer brewed on site, but also with the intention of, since Middletown is right in the middle of Dayton, Cincinnati, that there's a lot of home brewers that brew out of their kitchen, basements, garages, and to provide them the opportunity to come and brew at the Carnegie, and their beer can be on tap in the tap room, or you can bring friends and you can brew an anniversary beer, a birthday beer, something like that. And therefore, we can keg it, can it, and you can go on your way. The third use would be in the 1960s edition on the side where the wheelchair ramp accesses is more of the cooperative workspace, more of not necessarily an incubator where you have a maker space. Those that make pottery, stained glass and all that, but more of the office space, those that work at home, myself, that don't want our home address on our business cards, and we want access to a conference room for a meeting or an address for mail. That's what that piece is for. So all 3 of those working together in that building. So the brewers coming from the West Coast, the restaurateurs local, and then the cooperative workspace is just a separate LLC for those that want to come and do that. That's the intent.
And we want a lot of those people to be living in Oakland.
Right. Great questions.
So in terms of your role, is your role that of being the master planner, master developer for this project?
It's that, and maybe just a bit deeper, because we're going to be involved in the implementation and the rollout, and all the way through the process. We have.
You doing the development, vertical construction, all of that?
Well, we're not builders and we're not general contractors, but Dan is an architect, and we are going to work up some plans on what a house is. And one of the things that we're doing here that's incentivizing a builder to come in is we're lowering his development costs by presenting good available land, a set of pre-approved plans and basically an endorsement and an incentive. And that's exactly what has happened in Dayton with the Charlie Sims condos. And that's also the role that the 3CDC organization does in Cincinnati and over the Rhine. We're just replicating that in a smaller scale here in Middletown. So that a developer will come in and say, well, I could go build houses in the cornfields and do a spec build thing, or look at this program here that the city of Middletown's got in a neighborhood and all this support, and so we think it'll be a very viable approach.
And also with that,
Example, I have a development and building company,
perfect.
Oh,
and, so based on how I understand you said, I could come to see you.
yeah,
In a heartbeat, yes, sir.
yep,
Yes, yes, sir.
right.
In a heartbeat. Again, local folks, and you heard it, yes, everybody, please. So those locals that are here, Middletonians, Middies, anyone that has those skills, please. It's literally community-based. So that's, again, part of that community action. Get that word out.
I'm glad you mentioned that. As you well know, Cincinnati is largely organized around neighborhoods.
Yep,
And in those neighborhoods, they have very powerful CDCs, which
Yep.
are legally incorporated entities, nonprofits, but they exercise a lot
yeah.
of influence. So are you considering that kind of, when you say community organization, I mean, are you?
Yes, but, and here's the but, we want you guys to do that. We want to empower you guys to form your community development corporation. We don't want to impose it down on you. We want you to come up with the idea. I run a community development corporation myself. It works in conjunction with a for-profit property development company, and the CDC takes donations, charitable donations, free land, et cetera. The community development corporation, or the for-profit development corporation, gets the tax credits. And the properties are leased to the development corporation, gets the tax credits, and then eventually the money is paid back to the CDC and they do it again. That model is what we want to seed right here.
Glad you're here.
When will some of these blueprints be available for builders like me and Chip and Dan and some of the other guys to view, to see what kind of concept y'all have for this area? You know what I mean?
Sure.
They are,
I'd like to see them.
Definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're on our work list, and we will have some drafts on that probably in the next 4 weeks or so-ish. Right now we're very intently working on the survey and determining the boundaries according to the National Park Service standards. And we have some more work to do on that. We're building a financial model that everyone is going to look at and make a decision that, yes, this is working, this is meeting our expectations. And then part of our first phase of deliverables will be some conceptual drawings on the infill.
Definitely accessible for review, comment, everything like that, truly. I mean, that's the intent.
Yeah,
Is it gonna be a variety of space? Is it gonna be like, based on a 50-foot infill lot or a?
That's the intent. That's what we're finding based on those widths of the neighborhood and the zoning setbacks and everything. Just following.
We'll have some models for infill into the existing, they seem to be about 37 to 50 feet in length and various depths. We'll have a model or a couple of models on that, probably a couple variants on models, and then we'll have we've got some other bigger spaces, the Vale site, and we'll probably have some slightly different and adjusted things for those. We'll probably also have something for important corner lots.
Yeah.
We've got a number of vacant corners, and corners are important. They need something a little more.
To anchor that corner in that,
Yeah.
on those two streets.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Are we gonna also look at incorporating commercial in terms of, because like when I go down to Cincinnati and Dayton and look at some of their, some of the areas that you talk about, because I've done a project like this similar in Detroit, that they have residential with commercial, like a little, like you said, like a
Yeah.
little restaurant or a,
Yep.
Popeye's chicken and,
Right.
Right.
you know what I'm saying, where it's actually, increasing the value
Right.
as, you know, in the area.
Yes.
You have some key corners and locations right now already existing in Oakland with commercial. So it's kind of building on those and also working with zoning to see where else that would work
Yeah.
within their plan. But yeah, that's the intent. I mean, you do have pop-ups everywhere. Any other cities like Detroit, Cincinnati.
There are some nice examples that we have as well of, especially on the edge of a neighborhood, using some of those residential properties for small businesses of neighborhood needs in that way. And we've got some models that we can all sit and talk about how other communities have used those in a good way, and whether or not that works here or whether we want to actually build something you call commercial. But the answer to your question is yes.
Anyone else? Great questions.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We genuinely appreciate it. If you have questions later and you want to do them, please send them in by email. Everything that we're doing, including the video tonight, we all have on the webpage. We'll put the PowerPoint on the webpage as well. And again, we're here to answer questions. We're here to try to move everything forward. So we are generally appreciative that you came tonight, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.